Fru here. Welcome to today's lecture. So guys, in today's lecture, we're going to be continuing on the series that we've been doing around Python for beginners. More specifically, today we're looking at lecture number 104, casting within Python. So let me move this aside for a second. So we're going to be looking at today's topic, a lot of content to cover, casting within Python. So there are a lot of concepts. We're going to look at experiencing mismatch for different data types that happens within Python. And once we've experienced that, we're going to go through a certain concepts that will explain how we can cast from one data type to another data type. So we're looking at casting from, say, some arbitrary data type into an integer, or casting from some data type into a float. And we're going to looking at casting from some data type into, say, a string. This is going to be very exciting. As we're building Python code and we're working with Python, you might find yourself in a situation where somebody gives you an integer, but you want a float. How do you make that transformation happen? All right. Or you might have a string and you want that into a number. How can we make that happen? This lecture is going to break this all down in the four concepts that we have, so we can get an experience around that. As always, I'm going to switch back into Python in PyCharm, clean up my environment a little bit. My working area from here needs to be cleaned up as well. And we're going to open up the casting lecture. So if you're following with my GitHub, you can have access to this. All the code is written already. But we're going to walk through this step by step so we can get familiar with this particular concepts. Very, very important as we go on to building and gaining mastery in Python. So let's start in the working area, a blank canvas. So the first lecture for this particular one would be, let me make sure I get the concept correct. It's going to be concept 1.4.0 4.0, and this will talk about experiencing. Let's make sure we can type correct. Data types mismatch. And the reason why we do this is I feel it's important to have an idea of what a mismatch looks like. That way, once we start explaining casting, now we can go back and say, yeah, I see why this is important, because if we don't do this casting, we're going to be finding a lot of mismatches. We're going to be finding a lot of issues. And so this really becomes a very important topic. So let's start with the way we always do it. In this case, we'll work with an employee and salary, and that's the scenario we're going to be playing with today. Let's say there is an employee, and we'll define a variable called salary here, and that salary is for that employee is 900. Let's just say 900 of something, right? It could be $900, it could be 900 pounds, it could be 900 shillings, it could be 900 francs. It doesn't really or euros, right? But just 900 of something. That's what the salary is for that employee. Now let's define another variable for the employee, and we're gonna call that new variable tip, right? For some reason, we're gonna define the tip as quotation 300. All right. So now, as we can see, well, here I have 900, no quotations. Here I have tips 300. I have quotations, right? I'm hoping that by now we can start seeing something not right here, right? Because this one is what? A number. All right. This one is what? A string, right? We should be familiar with this by now. If not, you want to go back and check my concepts on numbers, which I believe was 102, lecture 102, which talks about numbers, 103, which talks about strings, or even going back to looking at 101, that talks about variables in general. All right, that will give us some explanation of when I see a number, I should know a number. If I see a string, I should know a string. So basically here, what we're seeing here is a number and a string. All right, so let's go ahead and print on the screen where we say salary plus tip, right? Let's say we want to take a salary, add it to the tip, and then print the total amount on the screen. All right, let's run this and see what happens. Voila, there you have it. All right, this Python complaints unsupported operands types plus int and string. So it's giving us the problem right there, right? One is an int, one is a string. There is a mismatch. Python doesn't like that. It gives us some issues, right? And the way we solve those issues is we need to now cast. Casting means convert from one type into another type. So the way we can get past this is to make sure that they're all of the same type. All right, so we're going to cast one of them to the type that matches. So of course we're going to be casting the string to an int, so we can add the two ints together, and that's what we're going to be looking at in the next concept. So this brings us into concept 104.1. all right, and in this particular concept we're going to be looking at casting to integer. All right, so let me do a little bit of a cleanup here. All right, comment out this one so we can start afresh with our new code. So I'm going to copy this to the screen. All right, so we have casting to int. So the problem here is we have a string, but we're trying to do some addition here. We cannot add numbers. We cannot add numbers to strings, right? We have to add strings to strings, which is concatenation. If you're working with numbers, we have to add numbers to numbers, so we can actually do arithmetic operations. So now, since we have this, the 300 within is fine, but it's just a string, so we need to change that from a string into a number, and that's where casting comes into play. So what we're going to do here is, instead of just writing this as let me actually change this a little bit so that we have more things to work with. I'm going to do the way we cast. I'm going to introduce a new variable here, and I'm going to call this variable called bonus. So imagine an employee, they get salary, tip, and bonus. So I'll call this bonus, and I will call that bonus to be 70. So they have a bonus of 70, and it's still a string. So how do we change that into an integer? The way we do that is simply going in front and you say int, right? And you cover whatever string that is you have it with. All right, so this takes that string that we have in the middle, and it now forces this to become an integer. Very important. So here, let me change this for a second to match what we're doing about. So 298, that's an integer. So here I can take a string and make it an integer, but we know there's a difference between an integer and a float, which we talked about a little bit earlier, and I'm going to explain this a little bit more. So I can take this and say int, and I'll make this my int as well. All right, and then I'm going to say int, and I'll make this int as well. So remember, let's just do a recap here. Integer stands for whole numbers. In our basic mathematics, integer stands for whole numbers. So when I come in here and I say take this 900 and make it an int, what does it give me back? Right? It gives me 900. Let me write that here. So it's going to take that 900. It's already integer. It's going to convert into an integer. Nothing changes. It gives me 900. Now I have 299.98. All right. This is not an integer. This is a float, right? Or a decimal. All right. So, but I'm saying take this and make it into an integer. So what am I supposed to get out of this? What Python gives us for this is going to round this up, or it's going to round this to the nearest whole number, and it's going to return that integer for us. So the nearest whole number to this is 300. So it's going to return 300 for us. All right. And then of course in this one I have 70, which is a string, and I say cast it to an int. All right. It's simply going to take that and it's going to return 70 for us. 70 for us. So if I go ahead and I say print salary plus tip plus bonus, all right, it should be fine now because it has 900 plus 300 plus 70. 900 plus 300 is what? 1,200 plus 70, right? So 1,270, right? 1,270. So let's go ahead and run our code now to see what result gets printed. Did I not comment something on my screen? It's complaining about end of line somewhere. Do I need one more quote there? There you go. My quote, my end of comment section there was not good. So this stays the same. So let's just run this again one more time. There you go. All right. So it didn't quite give me what I was expecting, right? And I'm guessing that that issue is coming from our rounding, all right? And we can actually check to see what is being printed. So let's do this. 1, 2, 3. So let's print salary so we can see the exact values. Let's print tip, and let's print bonus. All right, and then at the very end, we're gonna print salary plus tip plus bonus. All right, so actually this, it rounds down. I think I misspoke on this piece. So the integer here actually rounds down. So instead of rounding up to the nearest integer, it actually just rounds down to the nearest integer. So this gets us 299 as opposed to 300. That's why we're getting this result. All right, but the whole idea is when you convert a float to int, you can actually do it. You can convert a string to an integer. There's a lot of things that you can take and you can convert to an integer. All right, and Python gives us the ability for us to do it. So for example, you might be building an application for to manage tips for your company, and they don't want to be giving tips in pennies or in cents, right? You want to just round everything to the nearest dollar or to the dollar. And so, you can start using the convert function to convert from whatever decimal that you get into a dollar, and then use that in your application. So very, very, very important concept for us to master. Now we're going to go into the next concept, which will show us how to convert or how to cast, right? Casting means converting in programming, how to cast into floats. And that will be our next concept. So let's copy this. 1.2 casting to floats. All right, so let's do that, casting to floats. And for that, I am going to comment this out, and I will comment that out. All right, so casting to float. Let's experience what it means to cast to float. So we're gonna do something very similar. I'll define salary equals to 900. All right, I will define tip equals to let's do 562.7 in this case. Let's define a bonus equals to, let's make that 300 to show us more variety in our casting. Let's do allowance, right? Equals to something, let's make allowance a negative number so we can see how to work with negative numbers. All right. By now, we know that trying to run a program like this is not going to work. If we just try to add everything, it's not going to work. Why? Because here we have an integer, we have a decimal, we have string, we have negative decimal, but can we actually cast this into something consistent? And if we're trying to cast to float, it's as simple as float around the specific digits. All right, so I'm just going to copy that float to this. All right, float to this, and I can do my float to this. All right, so very, 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 very important. So everything that we have here can be casted into float. So let's verify the result. So print salary. So we can see the salary that we're printing after it's been casted. Let's print our tip. So we can see the tip. Let's print a bonus. And let's print our allowance. All right. So here I expect this to print, but it wouldn't print an integer anymore. It's going to print, instead of 900, it should print 900.00.0, because now, remember, float has the decimal parts of it. This one really should not change because it's just going to print this is already a float. This one should take a string. Just the way like we converted a string to an int, we can also convert a string to a float if I only do that. All right. And then this one should also convert allowance to float, right? I should remember to do this. So even if it's negative, we can always still convert a negative number to a float. Float is the sign doesn't matter. So if we run this, all right, so there you have it. Everything now here is a float. You can notice now everything has the decimal portions assigned to it. So we've taken strings, so we've taken integers, we've taken negative numbers, we've taken float themselves, and we've all converted it to a float. So important, right? You might be wanting to do something to do with GPAs. We know GPAs, especially in the US systems, go from like 0 to 4, 4.0, all right? And then you can have 3.25 or 3.2 or 3.1 or 2 dot this or 3.6. GPA can be anywhere there, right? It won't make sense for somebody to have a GPA of 3.6 or 3.9 and then you just round it to 3. That's not going to be very good. Or round it to 4. Those are very different things, right? So then in that case, you want to be precise and you want to convert everything to a float and make sure that we're working with float. So that's where float really comes into play, really making sure that we have good precision when we're working. So this takes us as a good segue into our next concept within this particular lecture, which would be talking about if we can convert from integer, we can convert to integers, we can convert to floats, we equally can convert to strings. Strings is very, very, very common in programming. So let's see how we can convert to strings. And I believe that lecture is going to be 1.4.3, and that's correct. But before we start working on that, let's comment out this piece of the code and let's comment out this previous piece of the code. So we have 1.4.3 and we are ready to convert to strings. But as always, let's set the stage. So here we were talking about restaurants and tips and bonuses, right? So imagine that as part of that restaurant, the guests come in and they leave comments or they leave feedbacks to our waitresses or to our servants or to the cooks, all right? And we can take that and say awesome service, sis, all right? That's of course a string. We can go ahead and say, all right, then they go ahead and leave some tips for them, which would be, in this case, the tip that they leave would be, say, $250, $52, for example, and then they go ahead and leave a bonus, and that bonus was what? 332.0. All right. So this is all the information that that we've gotten. But if we go ahead and try to print, say print guest comment plus tip plus bonus, right? We know by now that this should fail because string, integer, float cannot print. It just does not print this way, right? If we're gonna print it and expect it to write out the string on the screen, we have to work with strings. So we're gonna have to convert this to a string. All right. And the way we'll convert to a string is to simply type string str around that. All right. In the first case, it's a string, we'll convert it to a string, nothing really changes. In the second case here, since we have a number, which is an integer, we can convert that into a string. All right. And so we do that. And if I do this, it's going to convert that into a string because we can only concatenate strings. We cannot take a string and concatenate with something else. And we've talked a lot about this. So just bear with me. I'm going to do some more things here just to make the formatting a little bit nicer. All right. And then I'll add one more here so the formatting is nice. All right. So this should print guest comment and then tip and then bonus. So let's go ahead and run this. All right. So there you have it. Awesome service 252. I mean, I can put more description in here so that we know what exactly these are, but you get the idea, right? We have to take things from one type, convert it to a consistent type in order for it to print well within Python and for it to make sense within our program. So conversion, type conversion, so type casting, right, which is the better terminology to use. They call it type casting. You're converting from one type, a string, to another type, integer, number, float. You're simply casting the type, and these are very, very important concepts for us to use. So if you're running your program and you start running into issues, you might want to check, am I using the right types? Am I mixing integers and strings? That might be giving you issues, so you want to always try to convert. All right. If you need more precision, you might want to convert from integers to float, or from floats to integers based on what you need. all of this will come together as the building blocks for you to go out and to build really, really amazing applications. All right, guys. So thanks for joining. Just to recap what we've gone here to today, let me increase this a little bit. So we've looked at converting data types within Python in this particular module, and we call it casting. So module 1, Python basics, lecture 4, and specifically we're looking at casting today. So by now, if somebody gives you a data type that's not what you want, you can go ahead and use the casting functionalities within Python to move it to integer, to move it to float, or to take it to a string. Very, very important. Guys, thank you for joining. So this has been today's lecture. Just to give you a sneak peek into the next lecture coming up is we're going to see how we can take all of this and bring it together. All right, what I want to do is to see how we can take all of this and bring it together into a program, right, that shows us how can we take input from the user and actually do something with it. All right, it's one thing to just open up and this is just a preface into what's coming up here. It's one thing to just open up our PyCharm and to just write numbers in there and print them on the screen. Now, the next thing, lecture, we're gonna take it one step further. Let's have a user give us that number or give us that string as an input into our program. We'll use whatever the user gives us, and then we can do something with it. Guys, I think that this is really taking it one step further, and now we're beginning to build the blocks, bringing all the pieces of the puzzle together so we can write amazing application. Guys, I'm really excited about that. I hope you've been following along. I hope your skills are getting better and better every day. And by this point, by the end of that lecture, which will be lecture 105, which will end this particular module, guys, we're going to have a lot of skills within our tool belt that we can really put together to start writing amazing Python programs. So I hope you stick with us. Please do subscribe. If you haven't subscribed, share this with somebody that might get value out of it. This has been Fru. I've been your lecturer for today, and I'll see you in our next lecture.